Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this session on the Neighbourhood Conundrum. Um, when I chose this topic for discussion this evening, I had no idea that events would overtake the neighborhood. So while my intention was, and we have very eminent panelists here to cover the entire gamut of India's relations with its neighborhood, but I suspect that one particular incident will try and hijack. We'll try and ensure that it doesn't happen, but do forgive me if it does. Um, we have a very eminent panelist, and I'd like to introduce them first before my introductory remarks, and then I'll request the panelists to speak, make their presentation, speak briefly, and then, of course, we want to make it as interactive as possible so that we can get some feedback, some suggestions, some questions. So on my right is Ambassador Mohan Kumar, Ambassador Dr. Mohan Kumar.
Professor.
Well, he is the Dean of Strategic Studies at the OP Jindal University, but more importantly, a Foreign Service officer, my batchmate and dear friend. He was ambassador to France, he was ambassador to Bahrain, and at a very crucial time, he was Joint Secretary heading what was then called the Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Myanmar Division. And before that, he was Deputy High Commissioner in Colombo. Of course, he's had a very eminent career. He's an expert on WTO and other matters, but today we are going to pick his brains on the neighborhood. Thank you, Mohan, for agreeing to join this panel discussion. On my left is another dear friend, Ambassador Manjeev Puri, who retired as ambassador to Nepal. He is a specialist in multilateral affairs, having served in New York for a number of years. And of course, he will bring a perspective on what is happening in Nepal because things aren't all that good, and I will come to that later. But thank you, Manjeev, for agreeing to join this panel. And of course, Ms. Indrani Bagchi, I think she needs no introduction. She's one of those journalists who has covered foreign affairs for so many years, and now she wears a different hat. She is CEO of the Ananta Aspen Center, but I recall her writings in the Times of India, extremely perceptive. Her analysis was among the best that one would read, and most importantly, an extremely balanced person. And I've had the pleasure of interacting with her throughout the years, and including recently on a session in Sri Lanka. She brings to the table a wealth of experience and a view from outside the South Bloc, if I can put it that way. I would like to acknowledge the presence of Mr. Shyam Saran, the president of IIC, and Mr. K.N. Srivastava, director. Thank you, sir, for your presence, and thank all of you for finding time to attend this function. Now, to come to the subject at hand, I think in India's neighborhood, India has been blessed or being geographically placed in a tumultuous neighborhood. It is turbulent in all respects in almost every country in the neighborhood, whether it's in the northwest, Pakistan and Afghanistan. In the north, we have China, Nepal, and Bhutan. In the east, we have Bangladesh and Myanmar, and of course, two island nations to the south, Maldives and Sri Lanka. I will start off with Pakistan because you know what is happening there. Pakistan has experienced years of turbulence right since its inception, and we have had a troubled relationship with that country since partition. And now we are faced with a situation where there has been a grievous terror attack in Pahalgam, the provenance of which is in Pakistan. And we are in a particularly fraught situation, and I'm sure there will be a lot of comments and discussions on this later on. But all I wanted to mention is that both Pakistan and Afghanistan are hardy perennials. We've always had instability in both these countries. Of course, in Afghanistan, you have the Taliban 2.0. People were hoping that it would be a reformed Taliban 2.0, but it isn't. It still has the same ideology. It's stuck to the same ideology when it ruled in the 90s. The only silver lining, if I call it a silver lining, is that this time round, they are not so inimically disposed towards India, and that is perhaps because of their problems with their patron or their former patron, Pakistan. And of course, Pakistan, in the attempt to seek strategic depth in the region in Afghanistan, has managed to ruffle quite a few feathers. And I suspect the British have something to do with it, as they had in the subcontinent with the Durand Line. Uh, China, I will give a pass because we need a separate session to discuss China. But I will request the panelists to speak about China, the influence of China in the countries in India's neighborhood, because obviously China has a very large presence in most of our neighboring countries, and sometimes they are not, the presence itself may not be very well disposed towards us. So we need to tackle that challenge separately in our neighborhood. In some countries, we've been more successful than others, but I think this is a problem that we will continue to face for quite some time. On Nepal, of course, we have a situation where we have a game of musical chairs being played, where one prime minister replaces the other prime minister, and then, of course, the same prime minister comes back. And I'm sure Manjeev, Ambassador Puri, will have a lot to say about that, and we could discuss that during the discussion period. Bhutan is perhaps the only country in our neighborhood which is peaceful, and with which we have excellent relations. And I do hope, even though Bhutan seeks to establish ties with China and settle its border problem, and that, of course, we watch very carefully, but the relationship between our two countries is exemplary. And I wish we could have had similar relations with our other neighbors. A word about economic cooperation, because the cooperation on generation of electricity, hydropower, is something that could be emulated by some of our other neighbors. I think there is an attempt to do so in Nepal, but I don't know how successful we have been. Bangladesh, we've just had a change of government in August last year, and we have what is called I don't call it an interim government, but certainly an interim advisor, and I think something that we will need to discuss. As panelists, I'm sure, will talk about the situation in Bangladesh and the relationship with India. All I could say like to say is that the situation, what obtained with Bangladesh since its creation in 1971, has dramatically undergone a change. Whether that will remain so for years to come, or whether with the elections impending, at least promised elections by the end of this year or next year, things might change, is something that we will need to discuss. As far as Myanmar is concerned, again, we have a huge problem on our borders that impacts on our northeast, and in Manipur, particularly the problems we face in Manipur, and of course, the close links that the tribes have with tribes across in Myanmar, not just in Manipur, but also Mizoram, and how that will play out, and how will that impact our own internal situation bears close watching. In the south, our islands, Sri Lanka, and that's something that I'm quite familiar with, having served there. I find that the situation has really changed in terms of what it was when I was there, but I think it was heading for a crisis. And I described that what happened in 2022 was a perfect storm. And that perfect storm was a combination of various factors like the mismanagement, maladministration, corruption, the April Easter bombings of 2019, COVID, and that huge economic crisis that erupted. And there India played a stellar role. Not only has India been the first responder, whether it was the tsunami in 2004, but subsequently India has been the first responder in the region, and with massive assistance, unprecedented, I would say, more than $4 billion pumped in terms of aid, whether soft loans or grants, mainly grants. Mainly loans, but then grants is a significant component. In fact, I was told when I was in Sri Lanka last month that in the last few months we have converted $100 million worth of loans into grants, which is very significant. So our total development cooperation partnership or assistance with Sri Lanka now crosses $8 billion. And even though we've had some landmark elections where the old corrupt system was swept away, the ancien regime was removed, and we had, and I'm sure Ambassador Mohan Kumar will remember the antics of the JVP and the armed insurrection against the government there, but against the then government, and now they are in power in an alliance called the National People's Power. And the president has already made a visit here to India, and our prime minister has gone on a return visit, and the relationship seems to be very much on even keel. The problem is that there are a lot of agreements, a lot of promises made. The real challenge is in the implementation. The last country, but not the least, Maldives. I think Maldives has also undergone a change of government, and in fact, the party, the president that came to power on an agenda of India out. Things looked rather bleak, but I think what we did was show strategic patience, and I think we have managed to turn around that relation to a great extent. I think I'm going to stop here and request the panelists to take over. I'd start with Ambassador Mohan Kumar. It's going to be a very free-flowing. I have not requested the panelists to concentrate on any one particular area or one particular country. I leave it to them and what they would like to say and would like to speak. I would request that it is now 6:45, 6:45, so maybe we should try and wind up by 7:30 or even before if we can, so that there's enough time for Q&A and discussions with all those present. Thank you very much. Over to you, Mohan.
So I would begin by thanking Ambassador Yash Sinha for this kind invitation. Pleasure and honor to be here. What I propose to do is to lay out some propositions. It's not specific to a neighbor, but then leave it to the others to kind of pick up from where I leave. So my first proposition is, can India really make the transition from being a swing power to a leading power at some stage without predominant influence in the neighborhood? That is the question. My answer is, I think it is not impossible, but I think it would help enormously for a country which is similarly placed like India if we can achieve predominant influence in the neighborhood. And that, to me, seems a challenge. Among all the things that we have done in our foreign policy, that, I believe, is a central challenge. The challenge, to my mind, is that the answer to that question, or how you meet that challenge, many of you will be surprised by my answer. It's not lack of strategic thought. It's not lack of people with strategic thinking or policy. I believe it's purely a question, not purely, predominantly a question of resources. I do believe that a 4 trillion economy, you cannot do neighborhood policy the way India wants on a shoestring budget. We ought to be a 10 trillion economy. That, to me, is key. You need resources. I used to joke when Ambassador Shamsaran was foreign secretary, I was JSBSM, and I would envy people of JS North, my counterpart in JS North, kneeling with Nepal and Bhutan. Not because my portfolio was any less interesting. I actually thought I had the best. But then he would have these crores of rupees to give away. And I would have a shoestring budget on which I am supposed to manage Myanmar, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh. So that would be my major gripe. So I really think it's a question we should be getting there as early as we can, 10 trillion, 15 trillion, and you will find neighborhood policy is much easier. So that's the first. The second, where I think we've also failed, frankly, is achieving integration. And I'm not just talking of economic integration. There is physical integration, digital integration, energy integration. These things should have been done by now. I mean, long ago in the WTO, we used to be fond of saying that the region which is least integrated is not sub-Saharan Africa, but actually South Asia. And that's not a medal you want, really. It's not anything to be proud of. So this, I think, we are making a lot of progress. We've had difficulties opening up our market. I agree, it's a problem that I cited in the first instance. We are a 4 trillion, but it's also made worse by domestic vested interests. I think years ago, we were not able to open up the jute market for Bangladesh, for example. And that is something that you should have done long back. But then there are interests here which did not want it. So it was not possible to do trade integration. But therefore, what we are now doing is energy integration, which is very good, I think. What we've done with Sri Lanka, for example, where we are talking of an electricity grid. We have done something with Bangladesh. So that's another way to go. If you can't do it in the context of SAARC, and if you cannot do it in terms of covering every possible area of integration, at least pick the areas where you are comfortable. And if there is an energy deficit in the region, do at least energy connectivity. But I think we ought to be really doing physical trade, investment, digital, and energy connectivity all together. It's only then that you really get an integrated market. So, where do we go from here, at least in terms of policy prescription? I actually think the time is right for a Gujarat Doctrine Redux, or 2.0. I leave Pakistan aside. Gujarat Doctrine does leave Pakistan aside, so I'm not going to include Pakistan in that calculus. But I think for the other countries, it's still not late to actually try and implement things on the basis of non-reciprocity, with the exception of security considerations, and I'll turn to it a little later. So that's really what I think we should be doing. It's still not dated. It is something that a lot of countries in the region, other than Pakistan, will welcome. The other thing we should be definitely doing, and I think Bangladesh is a classic example, we somehow, and I know it's not easy, and I would be looking to Manjeev to see how did we ever achieve that in Nepal. In Sri Lanka, we kind of achieved it. It did not matter whether it was Sri Mavo and then Chandrika, and then, we got along with Rajapaksas and so on. Bangladesh is the opposite story. Our policy became so people-centric, sorry, not people-centric, personality-centric, that you are focused so much on a leader. We did the same thing in Maldives as well. You had a pro-Indian president, This is something, I know it's easier said than done, but it seems obvious to me that you have to avoid falling into a trap of that kind. You have to be really keen, or at least make sure the policy is focused on the country and its people and not on leaders. On China, since, Yash, you asked us to comment on China, one very interesting thing that I picked up was in Myanmar, where, and it completely went under the radar in the press here, the Arakan army, along with the New Democratic Army and one other group whose name I can't recall, took over the army command in a place called Lashio in Myanmar. And China intervened to make sure that the rebels gave up this army command and back to the government. That is the extent to which China wields influence in a place like Myanmar. And I think it's significant. This is not, rebels don't readily give up an army post after going to trouble to capture it. And yet that happened. On China, from speaking from an Indian perspective, it is important to distinguish between strategic projects and non-strategic projects. Non-strategic projects is, building a auto route from the airport to the city. Those kind of things, I think, first of all, we should be relaxed. Secondly, if there are projects which are non-strategic, I think we should be doing more triangular cooperation with Japan, South Korea, and European Union. We can't do it all on our own. And I go back to my original point, which is on a $4 trillion, what can you do in the neighborhood? You can't do what you did in Afghanistan in every single country, sinking $3 to $4 billion. Even Sri Lanka, we've spent a lot of money. Maldives, we are spending $500 billion just on connecting the atolls. But that's not possible to do in every single neighboring country. So if non-strategic projects, if we can combine forces with EU, Japan, South Korea, triangular cooperation seems a way out. On strategic things, Yash, you mentioned Sri Lanka, but the defense agreement, the details of which have not been disclosed. For those of us who have spent time in Sri Lanka, it's quite a remarkable development. And frankly, it could have been done only with the JVP as part of the government. I would argue that. Only they could have delivered something like this. Every other party which was in power, the JVP would have jumped on it and so on and so forth. So that's quite a remarkable development, if you like. And if we can have red lines communicated to our neighbors clearly, if it is a Chinese nuclear powered ship that you're interested, tell them clearly that it's not on. And that is the only way. The only thing I would say is, if you do, lay it out in terms of a red line, you should be prepared to back it up. If they don't, meet your request or accede to your request, have at least. I remember doing this actually with a neighboring country. I will not mention which one, but you can imagine. We talked in terms of the initial steps, which could be telling Indian tourists not to go. If that country attracts a lot of tourists, stop the air connectivity. So you can have something. I'm not suggesting a Parupu drop, for God's sake. For those of you who know Sri Lanka, I'm not suggesting that. But something short of that is something that India can keep in readiness, so that the neighbors know that you mean what you say. And that is, I think, extremely important. I will conclude by just making one other point, which is a larger geopolitical development, which is the United States of America. It seems to me the US will now take its eye off the ball in South Asia. It's got too many other interests. We all know certainly Europe and Middle East is maybe going to receive lesser attention than Indo-Pacific. But in the context of even Asia, my suspicion is South Asia will now no longer occupy a place even in the radar. I'm not saying it was super important even during Biden's time, but at least during Biden's time, you had Kurt Campbell, others taking interest. But now I'm not so sure. Now that is, I would suggest, both a good and a bad thing for India. It is a good thing because India has a freer hand, I believe. But it also means that issues which are of fundamental interest to India's security and strategic calculus will now have to be met by India and India alone. I cannot see EU helping us do it. I can't see Japan and Korea doing it. So how much US was able to do in the past is a matter of debate, but at least we had somebody. Now I think we are pretty much on our own in South Asia. I put that as a proposition to you. There may be differences, but on the whole, therefore, Yash, thanks for the opportunity. I thought maybe wait for questions and so on, at least on Bangladesh and Sri Lanka. I hope to handle some of the questions, but I think on the whole, any person, and I'm now talking about it from a professorial angle, student angle, most people will tell you that we have done a better job in our foreign policy with regard to countries who are not necessarily in the neighborhood. And that is something that you will get from students and professors. May or may not agree, but that's just the reality of it. And I would suggest to you that that is a correction that we should make. Thank you.
Thank you, Mohan. You gave a very holistic sort of scenario of our neighborhood, and you suggested ways to move forward. That's very interesting. I think we'll discuss that, the Gujarat Doctrine Redux. And if I may add one more thing, our relationship with our neighbors should be such that irrespective of which government is in power, the people of the country, our neighbors, and us be invested. But we'll discuss that. But thank you so much, Mohan. Ambassador Manjeev Puri, and I'm remiss in not introducing him properly. He was also our ambassador to the EU and Belgium. And he brings, as I mentioned, the multilateralist. He's served in New York for many years. But I'd request him if he could also briefly, if he has the time, to touch on how the EU sees South Asia. Apart from, of course, his served as ambassador in Nepal, and get a very valuable perspective from him. Over to you, Manjeev. Thank you.
Yash, thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you to the India International Center. What an honor and opportunity. Yash, while I'm very happy to see my senior colleagues and so many members of the foreign policy stakeholders here, I'm particularly delighted to see my friends from Muscat here. I don't know what you did, but thank you very much, guys. Now let's have some fun, I know this camera is on, but, come on, it's 5 years to retirement. I can be a bit more candid about all this. Have you guys ever understood? There are two officers here who served the desks dealing with the neighborhood. Now, in the Ministry of External Affairs, for reasons that I'll happily share with you, so there is a little bit of mirth in the room. The guys dealing with Nepal and Bhutan are called Joint Secretary North. You ask me why? Some British Empire guy thought it was North. Yeah. We are continuing to say it's North. Incidentally, the guys dealing with Sri Lanka, Maldives is not Joint Secretary South. South is ASEAN, etc. This guy is called BSM. How did Bangladesh and Myanmar get into it? God alone knows. And then, of course, we have Pakistan, Iran, and Afghanistan. That's the old thing. These guys handle that. I had never dealt with any of these things, none of these at all. And so, sans any previous baggage, I landed up in my final post as the Indian ambassador to Nepal just after that entire imbroglio of the blockade and our this, that, and the other, everything happening. So, guys, I bring a very different perspective from the divisions who have handled matters and seen things. And I do bring another difference in the perspective, and that is an understanding of globalization, which in India, the civilization state actually is, in my opinion, very reminiscent in understanding. We are very happy to say, clap, clap, globalization, we are great, we are IT champions, we have Satya Nadella, this, that, and the other. We don't think that others have also benefited. And in the country of Nepal, we are only struck by one thing. अरे गाड़ी तो बड़ी नहीं है, रोड तो बड़ी नहीं है, building तो बड़ी नहीं है. Everybody in Nepal 5-10 years back had a smartphone. 25% of the population is overseas and not counting India, because all of them have got Indian Aadhaar cards and this, that, and the other. It is among the 5 top countries in the world in terms of remittances to GDP. The country's level of empowerment of the people is of a completely different order in comparison to our state of play, also as a result of this Maoist insurgency, etc. Nepal had the second largest number of international NGOs operating there, and with Afghanistan being the first one before this Taliban business that happened. What a changed society. You just cross the border and you can see the difference. I don't want to say that even their road is better. Usko chodo. You go to any village in Nepal, the guys will sit down, and as the Indian ambassador, I traveled the length and breadth of Nepal. I thought it was important to reach out to people. You went to any village, they would welcome you, give you a cup of tea, have a meeting with you, and produce a record of discussions at the end for you to sign. हो सकता है इंडिया में यहाँ पर रोड क्रॉस करो तो जो सब इंस्पेक्टर आपके साथ ड्यूटी में लोगों को लाठियाँ मार रहे हैं सड़क पे, यार सड़क क्लियर कर दो. क्या बात है यार, ये just understand this. Thank you, Agu, for being there. And everybody can understand these particular things. I'm saying this to you in this graphic manner, so you get to understand that the deal is quite different. And this globalization factor is also important for us to understand vis-a-vis Bangladesh. I'm leaving Pakistan out. So Yash, you started off by saying something that you took off from what I told you in the room where we were having chai, that you started this conversation well before this attack. Because if we do bring this in, we go back to the IC-81 movement. And everything is about Pakistan and this, that, and that I completely agree with you. You know, come on, you won't find me wanting in that case. Do whatever has to be done, etc. That's a different matter. But let's not put everything in the blame of, you do a podcast or something or anything in this. The anchors asked you just one question. Are Pakistan, kya kar diya? So I had to tell someone, man, have you seen India? Have you seen our size? Have you seen the Indian embassy in Nepal? And if you tell me, even if you've seen the film IC-81 455 times, would you agree that itni unki ability to hum log wahan par so rahe? ऐसा तो हो ही नहीं सकता. It is physically not possible, and it's not possible at all. Let's understand all of this particular thing. This is the nature of the game, at least in these countries. I'm leaving Afghanistan out because although this famous border at the top, Wakhan corridor is all there, usko chodo, we really don't have a border with Afghanistan. This is the nature of who we are. We also as a country need to understand the difference between civilizational states and nation states. It's a very important element, and it needs to be internalized, not just in conversations in the Foreign Office and so on, but internalized in terms of people, what we happen. Today, so much of diplomacy, especially with these countries, is about what's happening at the level of the people. The third point I want to make to you is, look, there's this word called hegemony. We all try to shy away from using the word, and so do I. But it's a very important word. It's the end of the game. The whole world is about that. If I give you a very outlandish example, Mr. Trump didn't call Mexico 51st state. He only called Canada 51st state. because this concept of hegemony is the way everybody looks at it. Think about 50 odd smaller countries in the world looking at India sitting in the United Nations. Which are the countries that they would say, if those guys listen to them, इनकी कोई बलबूता है, ये कुछ चल रहे हैं. With they're going to look at Pakistan, no. There's no child in the world who hasn't understood the India-Pakistan conundrum and partition and so on and so forth. Even Bangladesh they may think of. The two countries of significance are Sri Lanka and Nepal. And for us guys sitting in Delhi, it's only Nepal. Why? Because I wish we were sitting in Chennai, it would have been Sri Lanka. But it isn't the fact. It is therefore the way we think. Roti, beti, do we say it for Sri Lanka? We don't. Yeah, facts hai. You know, some things are geographies, as they say, to use your expressions or Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee's expression. You can, rewrite everything, but you can't choose your neighbors. This is the kind of things that geography is about. You can. People are making some choices, but not very fundamentally. Now, Mohan, you mentioned the thing about money. There's absolutely no doubt about it. You have more money, you can do much more. You are the world's largest economy, you can call a member of the G7 all kinds of names. Yeah. Can you do it otherwise? You can't, because the other guy will tell you, show you the mirror to your face. Yeah. There's absolutely no issue about that. But we have to deal with matters as they exist, not as we wish. And Mohan, if you don't mind my saying so, from roughly about $3.5 trillion to 10 and 30 and all, at least in our forum, we should be a little more mindful. These are not just simple numbers as they go on. They are extremely complicated sets of businesses which are taking place here. The question of China. Let us also understand, and I'm really talking about now Nepal and this eastern flank where there's much more, and also Pakistan. Look, we are not the successor state to British India. British India was part of the strongest military force ever produced on this earth. Soldiers of the Indian Army, the British Indian Army, patrolled the streets of Beijing. Those are very different days. On 15th August 1947, the other guys also knew who you were. And these are realities. Your abilities were limited. And the small countries also play their games. The Nepalis have been no less than that. Prithvi Narayan Shah, the moment the unification happened, figured out the Brits were a rising power. He made good scenes as far as they were concerned, but at no point let them treat him as another Indian princely state. In fact, there are two celebrated cases, the 1897 Darbar and the 1911 Darbar in India. The Nepalis did not sit with the Indian princes. This is you can go to the Habitat Center where these books are lying, you can read it off. These are things that we need to understand and not get too much carried away with all this in terms of the way nation states react with each other. And then there's the question of identity politics. You mentioned this thing about pro-India president, anti-India president. Arey bhai, everybody wants to get elected. कोई है president who doesn't want to get elected? कोई politician है जो कहता है कि मैं कुर्सी नहीं चाहिए मुझे? उसके लिए कुछ भी करने के लिए लोग तैयार हैं. And let's not get into, what are the levels of morality, etc. All guys are willing to do anything. If we go far away from us, go across the Atlantic Ocean, you just see what is happening. You and I would, close your ears and tell your wives, yeah, don't see the TV screen. पता नहीं क्या आदमी बोल रहे हैं वहाँ पर. But that's the way it happens. That's how you garner votes. And that's the nature of this game. And the chaps in our neighborhood, one of the easiest cards to play is us. It's the simplest card to play. I mean, I can tell you Nepal, the elections in 2017, the easiest card to play was anti-India card. There was nothing else. Boycott, this, that. So much so in my own embassy, I can tell you senior colleagues of mine who had come there when that blockade thing was happening, they would say, Sir, baat to theek hai. What else do you say? Realities are the way they are. Having said all this, Mohan, I agree with you, as they say in Punjabi, 200%. Ekla chalo re. That's the important message for India in our neighborhood. For the last 20-25 years, we've been fed this particular theory that the great white guys who left in 1947, their interests and our interests are very congruent. I have no idea from where these theories came about. And even during the real big times of Tibet, for a few years, you can say there was some congruence. They did nothing about it at all. After that, after 1971, in any case, they had a completely different agenda. And now, let me tell you, as a result of globalization, they are entrenched in all these countries in a manner where, to be very honest, it's not the Chinese that need to be worried, it's us who need to be worried. Why? Because the starting point, let's say 1947 as the starting point, we were at near 100. The Chinese were at 5 years. And today, if the Chinese are at 35, and I'm not arguing whether it's more than that or not, it has to come at somebody's expense. And that's the bottom line that we need to realize. Those guys have their own interest. Leave them out, man. Don't just try to fit your interest to be with their interest. This is something which I have noticed, as I told you, guy who didn't have any baggage, nothing at all. And to say we have limited abilities, yes, I understand we have limited abilities. But right in my own neighborhood, in the next door country to me, where my arms can go around them on either side, then let's put more emphasis on that. We'll see that Security Council seat when it comes to it. Look, this is a little important. That's how you get seen by the world. And that's the nature of this thing. Now, let me stop on this, because this kind of theoretical discussion can go on endlessly. So let's have some fun with Nepal. And let's start. मजा तो यही है ना, इसीलिए तो आपने मुझे बुलाया है, नहीं तो क्यों बुलाने का क्या जरूरत है? Yeah. So you want to talk about that? What is the thing that we are hearing today about Nepal? कि राजा को वापस ले आओ. Is it a fact? I can just say this much to you. Look, this happened in our lifetimes, 2008. How did it come about? A 200-year-old monarchy. How did it, in a sense, self-destruct? What happened? What are the people's changes? Now, these are all facts. A whole lot was said about great welcome to the king. Where did the king go, man? Not coming back after 15 years exile. Stays in Kathmandu, went for a few days holidays to Pokhara, and came back in a plane that carries only 20 people here. Yeah, they are realities. So yes, there is in a country like Nepal who have seen great benefits of globalization. Great benefits of globalization. A country which was LDC by definition, today is graduating out of being LDC. And so this political stability is, it's a very good theoretical construct. How does it matter? Italy is a G7 country with 45 prime ministers in 52 years. The Nepalis, despite these musical chairs and this, that and the other, the country has done reasonably well. You go and see the number of hotels there, number of things happening. Things are happening. And they've managed to, transition themselves in their own sort of a manner. People taking things in their own hands. All the guys are on the same page. They're all rent seekers. There's absolutely no issue on that. There's no great ideological difference. The communist is also willing to go to Pashupati Nath, to the ghat out there in the last times. There's no issue on any of those. This is the nature of the game. They're rent seekers. There's this positioning of me versus India, etc. What do I see it? However, as a result of exposure to India, more than our 75 years of independence, 80, 90 years, our freedom struggle, a degree of embedding democracy in their ideas is quite entrenched in Nepal. The fact that for many of the world, for us, etc., it's seen as a kind of monarchy, that's a different matter. It provides those who have, let me say, frustrations of the current state of play, a rallying point, etc. Does it mean it comes through? I can't give you an answer to that. Let me also make a simple point, that while they've benefited from all of this, post-COVID, there's been a great deal of stress there. There are remittances issues there. The economy is itself not bucking up. We have our own limitations in terms of what we can do, although we must do much more. The Chinese too, willing to talk more, but what do you want them to do? They're not going to take over the development of Nepal in various ways. You've got to do these things yourself. And there are these particular limitations there. But problematic is the level of empowerment of the people. Hence, they are not willing to keep quiet on poverty. They want to do something. They want to get up. They make a noise. They are in the streets. And today, the three guys who've been prime ministers right throughout, life is not very comfortable for them. Because people on the streets ask questions, and they're making things difficult. Are they realizing it? I don't know the answers. I don't think so. But that's the nature in which politics, unveils itself. But I want to, stop. Yash, I think I've almost taken up my time. I want to just say this to you. These are all countries which are critically important to India as we climb towards a higher place on the global high table. These countries are critically important because they are what makes up that entire hegemonistic arc by which the world looks at us. And therefore, my own view is these are countries with which we need to have very strong political links with politicians in their countries on a constant basis and right throughout. All of us civil servants, military officers, we have no end of thinking of what we know and do, and we are very capable in our. But politicians at their end, who have almost all been trained in our way of thinking, there is a certain kind of methodology and an understanding that goes. And that's particularly important. That's all that I would say is Gujarat Doctrine, Redux, etc. There are many issues to that. I leave that out. But a much closer contact, even when things are not going good, because that's the nature of it. Don't slip up with the people. It's the people's connect which is keeping things going. Globalization has this unfortunate ability of being able to push the people's links away. Thank you.
Thank you, Manjeev. And I'm glad that we got you on the panel to not only inject some levity in the discussion, but also give a different perspective in terms of globalization, and specifically in Nepal. Being a Bihari, I have particular interest in Nepal and the Gurkhas. So thank you so much for bringing that perspective into the discussion. And now I'd like Indrani, Rani Bagchi, of course, I don't know, I did mention, I think I did, that she's currently the CEO of the Ananta Aspen Center. And of course, as I said, a very seasoned journalist, and will bring a perspective, as I said earlier, outside South Block into this discussion. Indrani, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador Yashvardhan, and thank you, IIC. Thank you, Mr. Saran, for this evening. I will focus on the bad areas. We are in a bad place with two of our neighbors, and the reason I will focus on this is they're two radically different stories and two radically different ways of journeys to where we are. Bangladesh is the first, Pakistan is the other. Bangladesh is, if you go back to for the last 15 years, and I say since 2008, we have been virtually a textbook neighbor. We have done literally everything right. We've integrated, we've built transit, we have helped the economy, zero tariffs, open markets, integration of every variety, allowing transshipment facilities, open borders, huge infrastructure, investment, you name it. India has done it. It has done the only land border agreement with Bangladesh in the past 15 years. I don't think, and this is not one government, this is across governments. I don't think we played a wrong card. You can say in retrospect that you were too nice to Sheikh Hasina, not nice enough to Khalida Zia. The point is, when at least Indians, the last example we had or experience we had was of BSF soldiers being carried on bamboos, their bodies being carried on bamboo sticks by the Bangladeshis in that last, that is the last image that you have of a Khalida government. It took a lot from Manmohan Singh's government in 2008, 2009 to persuade Sheikh Hasina to roll up almost 20,000 extremist madrasas from the border areas of Bangladesh, and that is no small feat. It was the two governments together, the Manmohan Singh government and then the BJP government, that came together to do the land boundary agreement. And I think, but yet we are here where we are today. And I don't think there is one fault, and I do believe that it is not fair to blame ourselves for this. There are other factors, there are other forces. Bangladesh is an interesting country. There are two, at least from my perspective, there are two dominant strains, dominant identities, the Bengali identity and the Islamic identity. The Bengali identity worked for a very long time. We are now back to the Islamic identity. And that is, you can see the difference that has made in the relationship with India. I suspect we will be in a very poor place with Bangladesh for a very long time to come. It is not about Professor Yunus, who I think is living his life's dream by being the head of Bangladesh. But it is the forces that he cannot control, or maybe he's unable or unwilling to control, but those forces that are coming back into play in Bangladesh will have an adverse effect on India, on the border states. And you can see a lot of that happening even now. Reports of the fact that apparently his law advisor met with LET operatives the day after Pahalgam could be a coincidence or not, depending on how you look at it. So we are now again confronting a Bangladesh that we thought we had left behind in 2001, 2002, of a Bangladesh that is building much closer relations with Pakistan at a very difficult time. In Pakistan, the army, I don't think there's any need to tell this audience, at least, the economic condition of Pakistan or the fact of political instability. What is more interesting is that an army chief like General Munir, who is not known for being a voluble person, unlike some of his predecessors, actually went to the trouble of giving a speech which in some ways was reflected in the actions of the terrorists in Pahalgam on the 22nd of April. If you just go by that speech, this is the return of an army general, of an ideological army general in charge of Pakistan after Zia. And that is a matter of concern. That is something we need to look at, because it also shows a return of terrorism in Kashmir in a way that we hadn't seen before. The kind of terrorists, if our friends in the security establishment is to be believed, are the kind of terrorists that we are seeing in operation now in Kashmir, very different in character, much more battle hardened, and much more difficult to detect. But you would see other manifestations of a person like General Munir in charge of Pakistan, and that would be the fact that the former Prime Minister Imran Khan remains popular despite being in prison. The current government cannot particularly handle the economy. Their enemies are, if you believe that speech, their enemies are not just India. His enemies, he very clearly articulated his enemies to be the Afghans as well as the Balochs. So if they are surrounded by enemies, everybody who has dealt with Pakistan, and Ambassador Yashvardhan has one of the longest experiences with Pakistan, we all know where that that negative energy is directed. So what happens after Pahalgam and after this terror attack? I suspect we will see some kind of a muscular response. I think we will take our time about it. We are already seeing the LOC has become live in the last 48 hours, certainly. And I suspect there will be more. I'm presuming that we will not make some of the mistakes that we did after Balakot. But but if the national argument has gone back to two places, which is very familiar ground, which is one is finish, destroy Pakistan, and one is take everybody out of their jobs in everything that has to do with Kashmir. I think both are unrealistic. Certainly, there will be a cost that will be imposed on Pakistan. The point is, and we will be getting there by holding the Indus Waters Treaty in abeyance, which may not look too much at this point, but if we persist with it in another 6-8 months, I think Pakistan will begin to feel the heat, which again will be directed at the common person. We don't know how they will respond. They have already said that it would be water warfare. We will have to see how that works out. But just to say that in the larger context of the neighborhood, even without doing very much wrong, and it's not like we've been ideal neighbors ever. I think we've only recently learned to be better neighbors. But even without taking too many steps wrong, we can still get a neighboring country wrong. But I do believe that these are cycles of history. Ambassador Sinha and I, we were on a dialogue in Sri Lanka last month. And one of the funniest things that I heard, and this was after acknowledging that India had been so forthcoming with its assistance and $4 billion and XYZ. And they said, and we talked about integration, just as you said, we talked about integration, energy integration. They said the best thing that would happen is the port terminal. But you know what? There is a wind power project that is happening, and this Adani is actually stealing Sri Lankan wind to generate power, and we are not getting any money. It was mind-boggling in its concept. So it was. This will never. My sense is this will never change. The Bangladeshis are now at this point angry as fire with us because we've stopped their transshipment from Delhi airport. Petropol Benapol is virtually closed. Every Bangladeshi who wants to travel for medical purposes will not be able to travel to Calcutta. It's not like they are not bloody minded. They are. They want to set up a hospital. They've asked the Chinese to open up hospitals in Chengdu for their people. Do you think anybody there speaks Bengali or knows how to make fish curry rice? No. But that's a different matter. So I'm not saying that we do things right every time, but even when you take the right steps, we took all the right steps with Soli. Yet we have Moizu today. It's not like we took the wrong steps. We did everything right. So we will go through this because I think the asymmetry of power in this region is so stark and so vast that we don't actually look at India from the point of view of a person in Maldives or a person in Colombo. We look very different from there. And I don't think we appreciate that enough. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you to all the panelists. I think this is a very, very interesting discussion that we've had in your initial presentations. I'm sure it will spark a lot of interest. But before we open the floor, if I may just ask all three of you to very briefly touch on one issue, which you have in your different ways, and that is greater integration. Now, as far as greater integration goes, we've always found that our neighbors are very suspicious. Talking of Sri Lanka, the land bridge is not going to happen because they feel we're going to go and conquer them and make them our province of India. Now, that won't happen, but how do we convince our neighbors to plug into what is currently the fifth largest economy in the world and to convince them that it's a win-win situation on all sides. So please start off, Indrani, please start off.
Don't bother. There is no need. We don't need to convince them that UPI is literally the best thing since sliced bread for the average person. We don't need to. They can watch it in operation. Nobody wants to adopt UPI. They have some weird idea that we're going to steal all their money. But if it's ultimately they have agency. And if they have agency, if they want to exercise that agency, they're most welcome. I don't think successive governments in India or people have actually closed doors on a neighboring country, except Pakistan, and that we all understand why. But I don't think we've actually closed doors. I think the MEA's Act was actually sitting in Kabul yesterday. So it's not that, but I see no reason to worry too much about it. Once they see a strategic logic of their own, I think they'll come around.
Good. I think when Prime Minister Modi went to Sri Lanka, there was an MOU on digital. So I hope that, well, that's what I said, that as far as MOUs are concerned, we keep signing them and implementing them is the challenge. Mohan, would you like to say something on this?
Not too much, except to say that I take Manjeev's point that 10 trillion is not tomorrow, but we are talking about 7 trillion at least by 2030. We need funds is my point. I also think it's a hard slog, really. It's not as if you go to somebody and say, okay, we are doing this and we would like to, and I think there are enough examples with neighboring countries where things have worked well. And if we can build on those, it's a hard slog. It's a hard slog for China. Why does Xi Jinping go to Vietnam? Tell me. What is the power differential between China and Vietnam? He still has to go there. And that's because Vietnam is playing its cards beautifully. So every small country, I think, will try to do that. I take Indrani's point, actually, on Bangladesh. You're quite right, Indrani. Although in my time, we used to be cussered when we did not give enough access on textiles, clothing, and jute. But you're right. In the last 10 years, it's hard to disagree with what you say. We've done right by Bangladesh. And this is force majeure, really. I mean, one could argue that the last term of Sheikh Hasina, some warning could have been given by us because it is becoming more and more obvious that she was... We did or did not? Okay.
I think we did.
Okay. But I take your point. So the answer to your question is that you try and do whatever you can, and it's a hard slog with neighbors because I see, and I think we should also not try and, to be too loved in the neighborhood, and that's not an objective, frankly. And China doesn't do that. No other country does that. And even the Mexican ambassador in WTO used to say, look at the plight of Mexico, so close to United States and so far away from God. So it's okay. I mean, neighbors will behave like neighbors. So thank you.
Yash, my view is only regarding Nepal, not others. It's very different. I am not, Nepal consistently ranks among India's 10 largest export destinations. And if, as you said, you are from Bihar, if you have any idea of the border, I assure you it's among the 5 top export destinations for India. Okay. You ask any Indian company, how come your retailer sitting in Patna is doing some extraordinary amount of sales? जरा उसको 2 मिनट समझाओ तो कहता oh my God, ये हमको पता चल गया कहाँ पर रिटेल स्टॉकिस्ट का पैसा जा रहा है। गोरखपुर में लोग बना रहे हैं एक के बाद एक बड़ा सा मॉल, वो सिलीगुड़ी का हाल देखा है कभी? What's happening? You think some Indians are going to Siliguri and buying? Not at all, man. Nepal is completely different. Discussedness is the right word. We have that in us. We deal with Nepal very differently than we deal with all others because we are unable to differentiate between nation state and civilization state. Believe me, I'm not telling you build connectivity into Nepal. Build it only up to the Nepalese borders. Yeah, the British Raj had excellent connectivity till everywhere. They had trains going to every single part of Nepal. We have none of them. हमने प्लेन रोक देते हैं, कभी कहते हैं सरसावा के ऊपर जाएगा, कभी यहाँ से जाएगा, वहाँ से जाएगा. Look, we all know what are the reasons, but we just don't want to give more. UPI, You know, I want to tell you, the moment it was introduced in India, I was the ambassador there. We tried hair like mad. If I show you the letters which we got from the UPI guys, you laugh. That's the nature of all of us. We don't want to do it. We think that this is a kind of give. God knows what they will get. And yet, the realities are fantastic. The Nepalese know us very well. Today, the largest and most interesting Nepalese communities are in Bangalore. They are in the tech business. You won't even know whether it's a Nepali running the business or an Indian. Do you know the largest individual shareholder of Tata's, the Tata Hotels company, the Nepali? Wow, momos. How many of you have not had momos who don't have street food? It's a Nepali company. हाँ सर, हम सारे ऐसे ही हैं. वाई नूडल्स की तो मैं बात ही नहीं कर रहा, वो तो टाटाज में आ गया सर. The largest homeopathic manufacturer is a chap from Nepal. So ये तो ऊपर की बातें जो एम्बेसडर को पता है. नीचे तो पता ही नहीं है कितने सारे लोग CEOs हैं, ये है, वो है, वगैरह वगैरह. They know how to do it. They manage their things. Can we agree to do it a little more formally? Believe me, in this age of globalization, don't lose out on this People's Connect with this 30 million people, which for me is perhaps the most important country for us in terms of this climbing the global ladder and the world seeing you as a country that counts, because you must count in your neighborhood.
Thank you, Manjeev. That was really good, especially on Nepal. I think I completely agree with you there. But I'm going to throw open the floor now for questions. Could we take Mr. Srivastav and then gentleman sitting there?
A very brief question to Indrani. See, the general impression, Indrani, we have is that Nawaz Sharif, when he was Prime Minister, he was generally interested in building bridges with India, bus page, you know, that Lahore bus journey and all that. And it is the military who sabotaged it. And another impression that we have is that his younger brother, Shahbaz, is basically, you know, since Nawaz cannot hold the position, so he's holding on his behalf. So this General Munir's statement, which you just referred, no doubt I agree with you that it has very provocative, and it might have definitely caused what happened in Pulwama. So is it again the same moment what Musharraf did to Bajpayee, Munir is doing now? Because Shahbaz Sharif, he has made some very positive statements trying to, you know, develop, improve relationship with India.
Indrani, can we take a couple of more questions and then the gentleman there? Yes, please. Yeah.
Senthil Raj on the Vision India 2032. My questions are to Manjit Puri. First of all, a note. Thank you for saying what you said about the culture of the nation state versus the princely states. We do have bungled in that, as you rightly pointed out. Number two, with Nepal, our exports are at what? $6 billion, 6.7 billion as to 1.5. Have we ever gotten it into our heads, right from the business community and as well as the policymakers, the South Bloc, whether to invest in the infrastructure of Nepal vis-a-vis the Chinese who invested in it and taken away from India? I had the distinct advantage to address at the Staff College in Nepal, and they all want to be with India, but then have we ever taken a step forward in manifesting it, showing it, expressing it? As you rightly pointed out, Gorakhpur and all those borders, yeah, I do travel and I see how it is done. Coming back to Ambassador Indrani, you rightly pointed out that we have done everything right when regarding to Bangladesh. According to who? To serve who? We all know that diplomacy is only a euphemism for economic diplomacy. So haven't we got ourselves to blame that we haven't gotten our cards right, actually? When the fifth wave of ethnic cleansing happened between 2001 and 2003, I was right there. If you had walked the streets in Bangladesh, you would see pieces of mutton meat of Hindus massacred after being atrocities committed upon them and the families. What did we do? We opened our borders. Now, you also mentioned about, aren't we to blame ourselves when we hold the transshipments in Delhi? Oh, rightfully so. Choke them on the water too, like what we are doing with the park, isn't it? In fact, you mentioned about the identity of the Bengalis and the Muslims, we haven't gotten it right. Yeah, you're damn all right. When have we gotten it right? When have we figured them? In fact, if you take back to 1946, our population was 46%. According to them, it was much more actually. But 2023, it's less than 6%, according to Article 2, 1948 of the UN Charter. It's the classic definition of ethnic cleansing and genocide. When have we called their act? I call it the silent Holocaust, right from 2001, 2003. So when are we going to get our act together? We could talk about trade, we could talk about building, because this discussion is about our neighborhood policies and India being the global leader. It also means growing a spine, isn't it? In terms of every aspect, economic sovereignty to energy sovereignty. Where are our supply chains, madam? Have we secured our supply chains? So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you for that very detailed observation and question. I think we'll stop here because I think there's a lot to answer. So the first one, Indrani, I think both the questions are posed to you, but we can always...
Can I just interrupt? I've been here for 1 hour, but nobody has shared their condolences for the families who have lost their lives by a cowardly and a shameless act by our neighbor. Unfortunately, they never learn lesson. They've been a headache since their inception. They are still a headache. But I've been here for 1 hour and nobody has even spoken about their condolences to the families who have lost their lives. So
Well,
I want to share.
I'm glad. Thank you for pointing it out, and we'd like to extend our deepest condolences and condemn the dastardly attack on innocent civilians. But thank you for pointing that out. Indrani, would you like to?
About Shahbaz and Munir, I think that the world is no longer accepting of a Musharraf-like coup. But if you go back from Munir to Bajwa to Kayani, they've all been generals who've run the country without actually being in front. Munir is interesting because he's actually an ideologue. He's actually he's a very deeply religious person, as a Hafiz. He's also the person who was sacked by, as ISI chief, by Imran Khan. So I suspect there are layers there that does he run the country? I think completely. I don't think Shahbaz Sharif has it in him to run the place. And I don't think any of this means anything for people like Nawaz Sharif reaching out to prime ministers, etc. Because even in '99, we would have to be really naive to believe that Nawaz did not know or did not tacitly at least condone Kargil. So I don't think that. As for Bangladesh, I remember 2001 to 2002, that those years. I also remember that from 2008, 2009, we did get some cooperation on security. The fact that Hindus have been killed in Bangladesh for a long time, even during Hasina's rule, is absolutely correct. Every Durga Puja, there have been killings of Hindus. There have been Hindus who've been disarmed and removed from their land and sent across. Every one of them is right. I think the fact that we went ahead with a relationship was that the same reason why when Pakistan had terror attacks against India in the years between the years 2004 to 2008, we still went back to dialogue with them, because the conventional wisdom then was, it's your neighbor, you can't change it, you have to go back to talking. With Bangladesh, it was different, and I think we did get a number of sort of successes with Bangladesh in the past 15 to 18 years. What we are seeing now is a return to 2001, in my view, and that is how we respond today will determine how Bangladesh and India deal with each other in the future. But a lot of it, like with Pakistan, you cannot stop that coming and going. As you know, there are 54 rivers between the two. countries, it's very difficult to police that or to get that. So we get some things right, but some things are also, I'd say, we probably don't get everything right, but also some things are beyond our control.
Actually, it could be in our control if it's true.
Can we get back to Indrani, you've been elevated from CEO to ambassador. No, but I wanted to add one point. You mentioned Bangladesh, but it is the change in demographics is far starker as in Pakistan. If you see what it obtained in 1947, population stats, and you see now, it's much worse than Bangladesh in terms of what happened to the minorities. But I'll stop there. A gentleman here and then the lady thereafter.
You think America, which now Trump hates Pakistan, so it would not interfere. Similarly, China has themselves been victim of terrorism. Would they therefore like to help Pakistan at all? That's one. As far as Nepal goes, why is it that the common man, including myself, always think of Nepal as being a very poor country where we get servants and they steal and they run away to Nepal? That is the impression we have. And the other thing is that, we're talking about giving aid in a non-reciprocal manner. But if the Chinese had also followed that, would they have gained anything? Because they invariably either seek territory or they get debt from the recipients. Thank you.
I think you go after that, Will.
So, considering China's interest that is vested in Pakistan, including the Belt and Road Initiative, and also the 40-year lease they have on the deep water seaport they built in Gwadar, what is the amount of involvement that we could see in the eventuality that a war breaks out?
Chinese involvement in Pakistan?
Yes, between India and Pakistan in case a war breaks out.
I think we'll take these two questions because they're interlinked in terms of war. I mean, US and China, you talked about China, Gwadar. I think, Indrani, would you like to start? Go ahead, you go ahead and I'll supplement later on.
One is China will continue to help Pakistan no matter what.
But they don't ever take part in armed conflict.
I'm saying that they don't need to take part in the armed conflict, and that's also part of your answer, because as long as if you notice, the Chinese even helped to dilute the UN Security Council statement on Pahalgam. But they will continue to be with Pakistan. They will continue. It is a strategic investment, and it is not going to go away. That doesn't mean that they have to show up with soldiers or anything in the war, if there is a conflict between the two, but they will be there very much on Pakistan's side.
Just to complete this thing on Gwadar, China really can't intervene from Gwadar. You know what I mean? They do not really have those assets. We can easily blockade. I'm not the military expert here, but Gwadar. If we try doing that, what are the consequences and how will China react? That's a different matter. But we are not going to be doing that initially. So if they try and use Gwadar against us, we will be able to counter that initially. But one, if I may, before Nepal, I pass on to Manjeev. I think I'd like to disagree with you, sir. Nepal, I mean, I know the impression is Chowkidar and all, but they do much more. They spill blood for us. The Gurkhas, the tradition of the Gurkhas is something that we can never forget and should never forget. And I'm not going to venture into what the present situation is, but the contribution that the Gurkhas have made right from Maharaja Ranjit Singh's time, the British and the British Indian Army and the Indian Army is etched in history in golden letters. But I'll stop there, let Manjeev take that.
Yes, thank you very much. Spoken like the true son of a Gurkha general. Very well said. Thanks for remembering. Yes, father was one of the most remembered Indian ambassadors in Kathmandu, by the way. I must tell you, apart from being such a distinguished Indian. Sir, Chaukidar. Now on a lighter note, I must tell you, 2019 election, I was ambassador there, और यहाँ चौकीदार वाला चक्कर चल रहा था. I had to call some of the top politicians in India and say, भाई साहब, आपने जो मर्जी चौकीदार के बारे में लिखना लिखिए, लेकिन ये मत लिखे कि चौकीदार नेपाल से लाओ यार. जरा सोच लीजिएगा. What does that mean? So, sir, no one says that Nepal's per capita income is higher than that of India. It's not. गरीबी है, लोग गरीब है, यहाँ भी आते हैं, काम करते हैं. लेकिन this Maoist struggle, more than anything else, has exposed them hugely towards globalization and internationalization, quite apart from another very interesting thing. Sir, since till 1990, when the first set of political reforms happened in Nepal, there was no concept in Nepal really of giving people passports. So the only people who could travel were the Richie Rich and the Ranas and so on, and the Gurkha soldiers who were traveling on British duty. 1990 onwards, they started giving passports. Today, sir, if we say 25-30% of Nepal's citizenry is overseas, I'm not counting India, sir. They don't have passports. There are people in the Gulf. There are people all over Southeast Asia, in Australia, in Japan, in Korea, in the United States, in throughout Europe. You go to any village, even in this Madhes part, you see posters all over the place. Learn Japanese. Sir, कोई नहीं free में लगाएगा. लोग जा रहे हैं. This is the nature of it. It is among the 5 largest countries in terms of remittances to GDP. That's the nature of it. What it has done in today's world is it has opened their minds tremendously. So even this question of dignity of labor is a little bit seen differently, etc. On a lighter note, I must tell you, sir. मेरा फोन तो नहीं चल रहा यार, ये it's acting up कि मैं कुछ गलत बोल रहा हूँ. सर, आपको मैं ये पूछूं, आपने have you ever seen a big city in India where people say don't honk and nobody honks? Aizal is one of those places in Mizoram. दिल्ली में हम ऐसी चीज बोल सकते हैं. नेपाल में काठमांडू सिटी में there's no honking. People don't honk. They don't honk, sir. Don't press the horn. Okay, sir. Let me tell you another thing. I'm just telling you about changes. Sir, at a traffic light, how do people stand in Delhi? Have you noticed? Have you seen anybody in a straight line like this? The line ऐसी लगती है ना. काठमांडू में कोई ऐसी चीज नहीं है. मोटरसाइकिल भी एक के पीछे. I'm trying to say this really, that let us not keep thinking Nepal is the country we know best. That country has changed tremendously since 1990 in terms of its people's understanding of the world and what they are. Now I'm going to say a few more things to you to liven this up, and I'll come to your little thing about the figures. I'll come to your figures thing. We would think every Nepali speaks Hindi, they are only seeing Hindi films, and they are running after Shah Rukh Khan and this, that, and the other. Not at all. Not at all. They are seeing soaps from Brazil, South Korea, and so on and so forth. That's what appears on Nepalese TV. Nepalese, I'm sure most do understand Hindi, but many now find it very difficult to converse very easily as far as we are concerned. Hindi, अपनी टूटी फूटी अंग्रेजी में हमारे साथ बात करने की कोशिश करते हैं. There are a lot of these changes which are coming about. Nationalism is one aspect of it, but globalization is a totally different aspect. Sir, on your question, let me just answer this question. When I was growing up, any company in India which came on steam and it wanted to expand, the first country it wanted to go to was Nepal. So we had the Tatas go there, we had Dabur go there, we had ITC go there, and all are doing phenomenally well. आज अगर छोटी सी आपकी कंपनी ज़रा ठीक हो जाए, तो अगर पैसा थोड़ा सा आ जाए तो हम दुबई चलते हैं, थोड़ा सा ज़्यादा आ जाए तो सिंगापुर चलते हैं, उससे ज़्यादा आ जाए तो अमेरिका जाते हैं. कोई नेपाल जाने के लिए तैयार नहीं. अमेरिका नहीं जाता कोई. नहीं यार, ऐसा not true, but वो कोई नेपाल नहीं जाने. But in terms of investments, I want to point out the larger sets of investments to Nepal right now. Let me take the most important sector, hydropower, is Arun 3. I have one little point to make to you. I'm not sure that for these large infrastructure things, the Indian private sector is particularly ready for Nepal because it's a very rent-seeking polity. And perhaps using the Satluj Jal Nigam for that was not a bad idea. However they handled it. Once they start producing in the next few years 1,500 megawatts of power, can you imagine what it can do to the Nepalese economy, especially in that region? What it can do to the balance of payments between India and Nepal. And finally, I must tell you, the trade balance can also shift with electric vehicles and electricity becoming more available, and this fuel imports, which contributes huge to this trade imbalance going the other way around. Let me just leave these thoughts with all of you.
Mohan, could you please address the question that gentleman had posed about, and anything else you'd like to add on the US-China?
Yeah. Happy to do that, Yash. No, but before that, on Nepal, just to add to, I'm just back from Macau, where we had a Times Higher Education Summit. Amazing. All the hotels, there are Nepalis. Yeah. Not a single Indian. Macau is amazing. They pay well, but somehow there is a preference for Nepalis, including, in restaurants, hotels. The other thing I noticed as I was leaving Bahrain, where I was famously labor commissioner and not ambassador. Nobody in the Gulf should be called an ambassador, never mind. So in Bahrain, as I was leaving, a lot of Nepali immigration was happening. And while, of course, Indians continued to enjoy a tremendous reputation, the Nepalese were only slightly behind. They were considered very hardworking, very reliable, and so on. So I think I'd like to endorse those comments about Nepal. On the US-China bit, yes, my sense is, if you take President Trump's statement at face value, I mean, people keep telling me that you can't take him literally and seriously. I personally think you should do both. He says very clearly that, India, Pakistan will know how to handle this issue. The other statement he made when Prime Minister Modi went to Washington, there was a question on Bangladesh, and he said, I leave that to Prime Minister Modi. I think it's a clear indication of his thinking in his own mind, which is why I made the statement I did earlier on. On South Asia, I think we are going to be on our own, which is not a bad thing, left to our devices, but we should be ready for it. That's the more important thing, because nature abhors a vacuum, and the rest of it. On China, I'm inclined to agree with Indrani. I don't think China needs to do anything overtly. My sense is, and that is the impression, I visited both Chengdu also, by the way, the last 1 month, and I think the Chinese want this thaw to continue in their ties with India. So I don't think they will do anything overtly, but like she says, they don't have to do things overtly when it comes to helping Pakistan and so on. So I think that is where we are on South Asia. My sense is, and I say this, I speak under correction, but my sense is, I think our foreign policy will now find, we will find ourselves now drawn heavily back into South Asia. We've been away from it for a while, whether out of, whether it's benign neglect or deliberate, I don't know, and I wouldn't hazard a guess. But I think you're going to be drawn back to the region, because I don't think we can really afford not to. Thank you.
Mohan, that means interesting.
I just have one immediate comment. We should not accept anyone to broker the agreement between our neighbors. Like, we don't involve in brokering other conflicts outside India. Most certainly, we should solve all our problems ourselves and not allow anyone to even engage in discussions with whichever problems we are having with neighbor, because that's very dangerous and very tricky.
I agree with you. That is our policy.
Yeah. Sir, I want to know about recent Pakistan proposed investigation with neutral countries. So he says Pakistan would like to have a neutral country like China and Russia. So why this Russia is so important, or do you think they will support Pakistan?
As far as, okay, sorry, go ahead. One more question, yeah. Indrani, would you like to take the Nepal question and then Manjeev follows? Or you want me to do the Pakistan thing first? Okay. So, okay. So as far as your question, Mr. Dudeja, is Pakistan is trying to deflect, obviously, and they want a so-called neutral investigation. If neutral includes China, then I think I'll need to go back to the dictionary to define, to read what neutrality means. There is no question of a neutral investigation. Whichever. I mean, I'm not talking about Russia. I'm talking about China. We, as the gentleman said, we are not going to let third countries come. Our policy is very clear that bilateral disputes have to be sorted bilaterally. Yes, if there are friends who want to give us advice and want to give the other party advice, that's up to them. I mean, that's not mediation necessarily, and certainly we won't permit that sort of investigation to happen. As far as evidence that we have, I'm sure as an investigation proceeds, we already have some tech int. I'm not privy to what the tech int is, but it will come out. I mean, in time it will come out, and the Pakistan connection will be very obvious. The reactions in Pakistan, and just before I came here, I saw Najam Sethi speak about that. Now, Najam Sethi is supposed to be on the moderate side, from editor of Friday Times. Even the way he was speaking, it was just very clear that they just want to deny and deny. They do everything. Till even 26/11, if you remember, till we got Kasab, they were denying. And once they got Kasab, it was the same Najam Sethi and Friday Time that went to his village and exposed the Pakistani hand. So we will come to that, but I don't think there will be a neutral. I mean, they're trying to deflect. Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif has asked for a neutral investigation, but he's just playing out what the army, the script that the most popular leader in Pakistan is in jail. The man who I'm no great fan of his. I'm a great fan of him as a cricket player, not as a politician. But he is the most popular leader in Pakistan. He's in jail. And Asim Munir is very dangerous. As I think Indrani pointed out, after Zia, we have someone who is a jihadi general, if I could put it that way. And we have a problem on our hands. We must tackle him very carefully, and we shouldn't get carried away. So Pakistan will continue to make these statements to obfuscate their role, but we will need to handle it in a very calibrated, measured manner. And I'm going to stop here because Indrani, I think we're running out of time also. So Indrani and Manjeev on Nepal, if they would like to, media, and then you do the media, and then you can do.
Well, Akanksha, we've talked about this before. The point is that Indian media is A, not a monolith, B, does not run out of Delhi, and C, in Delhi, the interest in the neighborhood is actually episodic. If there is a crisis in Nepal, we cover it. If there is a crisis in Bangladesh or anywhere, we cover it. On any given day, if there is a story from Nepal, and we have to choose between a story from Nepal versus a story from Andhra Pradesh wins. The problem is, it is there for all our neighbors, that India itself generates so much news that has so much local relevance that it crowds out news from other countries. However, if you ask the same question in Bihar, in Times of India Ranchi or Times of India Patna, you will find a much greater spread of news from Nepal, or in Times of India Calcutta, much greater spread of news from Bangladesh. That's because there is a local interest. In Delhi, it is different. In Delhi, if you put Pakistan, everybody will write about Pakistan. So that's literally how it is. It's not perfect, but it's.
Indrani, thanks for using that expression, crowding out. Akanksha, the fact is that India has been changing and changing rapidly and becoming much bigger. So not only are our own actions of interest, but our bigger global interactions, take center stage. because they play to that narrative that we are working hard on. And in various senses for our neighbors, Nepal in particular, because it's considered we know the country very well and everything, it tends to become reactive in that sense of the term, because you say, you know it all, yeah, it's just a repetition, the same guy again, so what, how does it matter? That's the nature of it. But it is fundamentally because India is changing in our perceptions of the world where we are, etc. And so even the common people, their interests in terms of all of this tend to become a little different. Naturally, that guides politics.
Thank you. I think we are sort of running out of time. We have a guillotine at 8 o'clock, so we've already crossed that. But I think before I end, I think I'd just like to mention that as far as our neighborhood is concerned, we really loom large. And the challenge is on how we work with each of our neighbors, try and integrate them. And our neighbors are very adept at playing India versus a third country, whether it was the US in the past and China now. And we are aware of that. One last point which we didn't address, because we lack of time, is that point about Gujarat doctrine redux. I think that's a very interesting point, except for Pakistan. Obviously, Pakistan is sui generis, it's out. We need to be more generous in our economic treaties. We went to Sri Lanka, Indrani mentioned. I recall the FTA, the first FTA we really signed in the region was Sri Lanka. But then we stopped import of pepper, which is their biggest, I think Mohan was Deputy High Commissioner, he would know, stopped export of pepper from Sri Lanka. That's their main export commodity. We were being cussed. I think our Commerce Ministry, our negotiators need to be far more generous with our neighbors on economic matters. And whether there's a quid pro quo or not, that will happen on its own. We shouldn't be using that as a bargaining chip like China does. I disagree with people who say that China has this hard policy. China does. It can afford to have it. They don't have the sort of links that India has with the neighborhood. We need to be more generous and not insist on reciprocity on each and everything. Yet, as far as security is concerned, absolutely. There is no compromise there. So I think I'd like to just end this discussion, thank the panelists who would have found time to join this discussion here today. Extremely relevant, and as far as our neighborhood is concerned. We did address Pakistan tangentially. I think better left that way. But I think I'd also like to sort of convey support to our government in this hour of difficulty that we face, and I'm sure all of us will unite behind whatever action the government takes. But before I end, I'd like to thank the India International Center, the President, Mr. Shyam Saran, and the Director, Mr. Srivastav, who's present here for most of the discussion, and to Tete, the Program Coordinator, and her team for organizing this discussion, and to all of you for sparing your time and joining us in the discussion. A round of applause for the panelists, please. Thank you.